Welcome to Behaviorally Speaking, Leadership for Changemakers, the podcast where we explore how behavior shapes leadership. I'm your host, Dr. Esther Bubb, and this episode is brought to you by Esther C. Bubb ABA Services. Today, I'm joined by Shannon Fitzpatrick Thomas and Tracey F. two leaders whose work sits at the intersection of trauma, systems, and ethical leadership practice. Together, they bring decades of experience across behavioral health, education, and public systems. In this episode, we explore what it means to respond instead of react, how leaders can regulate themselves in real time, uphold accountability without harm, and design environments that restore trust rather than reinforce stress. Let's dive in. Well, hello again, Tracey and Shannon. Welcome to our episode for today. As always, I'm happy to have you here. And, I always want to check in to see how everybody's doing before we delve into the questions. So how are you feeling coming into today's conversation? Tracey, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm feeling great. Saturday morning, I think spring may be visiting us for a little bit here. So I'm happy to see the sun shining.
Wonderful. How about you, Shannon?
Exactly what Tracey said. This beautiful Saturday morning with you two is absolutely wonderful on a very great topic, very close to our hearts. And so thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Yeah, I'm very excited to have you here, and I'm just looking forward, you guys know, Island Girl, to the sun, the spring, the flowers, and all that stuff. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here chatting with you. So, all right, let's just dive into our questions for today. So what does it mean when we talk about trauma, right? And when we talk about responding versus reacting as a leader? What does that mean to you? Shannon, do you want to start?
Sure. I think that's such a great question to kick off your podcast today. What comes to mind for me is when you think of a responsive leader, that responsive leader has to create safety within the organization. If you're going to be a responsive leader, I think there's risk in that because you can unintentionally escalate threat in the situation or within the organization or in the context of those relationships that you have. And so we have to be responding with intentionality, being able to recognize the benefit of pausing to help regulate ourselves or those that are in the room with us. That also helps us to assess the context of the situation. And then it benefits because it gives us the opportunity to choose an action that's more aligned with our values rather than reacting to our triggers in that situation.
Thank you. What are your thoughts, Tracey?
And to piggyback on what Shannon said, pausing, absolutely. Think about a lot of people will respond to an email on impulse.
Yes.
And, that first thing you want to write is not always the best thing.
True.
And so, I always, even, especially to myself, let me read it. I may send it to, a friend before I send it to the person.
Yes.
And that even feels better. We teach students a lot of times to walk into a class or, therapy and put into the box what you want to pack away.
Yes.
And same type of thing, just getting it off your chest. But really in those decision-making times and those tough decisions, it's not about avoiding those hard ones, but it's about getting the person to move to the next step and helping them, guiding them, modeling, asking what is needed right now, and then making those future decisions.
Yeah, I love that. I heard both of you really, I believe, talk about like inserting a pause, responding. And I love the example Tracey gave with the emails because, I try to do that too. But as a behavior analyst, it makes me think of, that the pause is as a discriminative stimulus for intentional behavior, right? We want to intentionally send a positive response, as positive as it could be. So we pause, we read, we have someone else check it out for us. So on that note, I think of that as a regulation strategy. What other practical regulation strategies can leaders model, Tracey?
I think there are obvious physical strategies by your stance if you are physically near somebody and they can see you as opposed to via Zoom or something, but how you stand, the tone that you use.
Okay.
Sometimes when people are in a crisis or a heightened situation, they may talk rapidly. They may talk louder. and recognizing those on other people as well as yourself. So that pause sometimes helps bring your tone down, get your thoughts together so that you can take a moment and, respond again with, as someone said, intentionality as opposed to those triggers or that emotion. So trying to take that out of it and regulating yourself physically, mentally to be able to respond.
Yeah, I like that. Shannon, how about you?
To continue with the theme of pausing, I think, as leaders, we set that emotional tone, be it in a meeting or like Tracey was talking about interactions with youth or others or workforce. There's some simple, easy ways of practicing pausing. Some of, little responses like, let's pause, this feels tense. Naming what's happening, I think, is really important. As leaders, we have to set that emotional tone, like I said, being able to recognize when a slower pace is going to be more predictable for those that we're interacting with. Doing intentional pausings in meetings, I know that can feel uncomfortable for many of us, but that helps us to regulate. And, since we're setting that emotional tone, doing some intentional scheduled pauses or little breaks within context of meetings or trainings, interactions is really helpful. The therapist in me also says, what are some opportunities for integrating grounding techniques, deep breathing, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, not just, maybe saying, hey, everybody, let's do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, but in those trauma-informed supervisory meetings you have with staff or workforce, to be able to instill some of those skills so that if they recognize that they feel dysregulated in a meeting, they can, deploy those techniques in that moment. The word predictability is just so important as a leader. We have to predictability in the environment. If predictability is not there, consistency, I think we run the risk of, hurting others or creating an environment that isn't safe.
Yeah. It makes me think of, was it Bruce Perry, the regulate, the relate, and the reason?
Yeah.
So like being able to model that. And recently I find myself having to do that. And Shannon, when you said name, so I found myself, if I'm talking to someone else, trying to identify in the moment what's happening. I may not necessarily be naming it as you're saying, but I'm recognizing something is happening here. And then often I just pause. I just, let them speak, gather my thoughts and then move forward from there. So as we're doing all of that, Shannon, what mistakes do you think sometimes we mean well, right, Shannon? But sometimes we make mistakes. So with good intention, right? We're trying to be trauma informed. We're trying to do all of the strategies you mentioned. What mistakes do you think we might make along the way?
I think sometimes leaders get caught up in what does trauma-informed leadership look like. One thing I always say, it's not about lowering expectations. It's really about changing how we support people in meeting them. Some of the common mistakes that I've seen in, over my career, my 30-year career, so old, is, confusing trauma-informed principles with being like overly permissive. Sometimes, if we were really trying to be trauma informed or trauma competent, whatever stage we're in, is the excuse of just letting those healthy boundaries go. Boundaries have to be, set. They're predictable. They're intentional. And so we have to avoid, not holding others accountable to kind of help protect their feelings. Being over accommodating without structure, taking on behaviors personally instead of contextually. And the one thing I've seen a lot is really implementing language in job descriptions or policy and procedures without really changing the systems. And so those are a couple of those areas that, some of those well-meaning leaders, like you mentioned, may make some of those, mistakes that could be detrimental.
Yeah, I really like that point, Shannon, about job descriptions, right? Not changing practice. Because I think of sometimes I look at whether it's policy, procedure, whatnot, it says one thing, but, are we really doing it? Tracey, what are your thoughts?
To tag on what Shannon said about creating like the structures. And this is one thing when we work together, 12, 14 years ago, starting, trauma-informed care and practices, is creating that culture. So a lot of leaders may talk the talk. So they go to a training. It sounds real good. This is the hot new topic. So I'm going to throw these words out there, but they're not walking the walk. So the classrooms, we work in educational settings. So the classrooms aren't changing. The system of the program in our school isn't changing. It sounds good because we went to this training as a leader, or I sent my staff to this training, but now we're coming back into a chaotic, hostile, whatever the environment looks like. So really not making that mistake of putting the cart before the horse or vice versa. You really have to, systematically build that culture and make those changes.
Systematically build a culture and make those changes. Thank you, Tracey, because that makes me think of this question: how can leaders create regulation-friendly environments, right? You said the word culture, and I think if we're intentionally creating a regulation-friendly environment, that's the culture we want to build. So how do we do that? How do you do that, Tracey?
I know, again, when we first started, Shannon and I were creating checklist of workforce environments, like going in and almost like a pre-test. What does the environment look like right now with whatever you have in place? And then what do you want it to look like? Or, what would it take to look trauma-informed? Do you have a safe place for people to go when women come back from maternity leave and they choose to pump? Do you have safe environments for prayer? Do you, we looking at everything. It's not just saying, how do you feel? That's touching the surface. Yeah. So it's also not just saying, here's some cold water, or here's a fidget, things like that. It's really having that relationship. It's making sure the adults know how to regulate, because again, and I know I used this before when speaking with you, is that a dysregulated adult cannot provide regulation, no matter who they're trying to provide it to. Yeah. So really making sure that the environment has, again, that culture. It's in everything that you do, visually, physically, there, and it's clear. Yeah.
Shannon, what are some of the things you do on your end to build that culture that's regulation friendly?
To piggyback on what Tracey said early on, that 13 years ago or so, she was correct. We were doing organizational assessments that kind of helped pull out and extract some of the feelings or realities of workforce, to see, do they feel, are they being heard? Is their voice and choice valued? Is there transparency in the organization? Is there predictability in, role definition, expectations, communications, consistency? Is there, more consistency in work hours or emergency? Less surprises, fewer emotional spikes that kind of occurred during the day. And those organizational assessments really pulled them out to help us really identify down to each department or school or whatever organization we were working with to kind of build that baseline for them. Because we know environment communicates safety before words ever do. And we really have to think as leaders in terms of nervous system safety, and those organizational assessments, which I'm still a big proponent of, although I'm not in a role now to kind of help implement that. But that nervous system safety has to be built in from the leaders down, because what we uncovered was, some people were afraid to even walk into their buildings where they were located, or, the school was having some of these issues and so it was all over the place. But the good thing about it is that it gave the organizations the baseline to be able to say, well, we're here. And I remember one school was way up here and we're like, okay, that's great. So it was helpful, and it kind of was able for them to work on their own unique plan rather than kind of putting everybody into one plan itself. It was very individualized.
Yeah. One quote that you said that I pulled out that really stuck with me is you said, the environment creates safety before words do. Right.
Yes.
So I feel like as leaders, we all need to be accountable to make sure we are providing environments that are safe and trauma informed. And I think of sometimes as leaders, when I asked earlier about like, errors we might make and things like that, I think sometimes maybe I might be re-traumatizing people. I'm not even knowing about it, right? But then if I
Mm-hmm.
find out, how am I holding myself accountable? So my question here is, what does accountability look like for each of us in trauma-informed systems? What are your thoughts, Shannon?
Well, earlier I did talk a little bit about accountability to a point. So accountability sometimes in systems, is thrown out the door because people are afraid to move in and hold people accountable. And what comes to mind is like some of the criminal justice system and the trainings that I've done with that population from, high level elected officials down to agents. But, through that trauma-informed care perspective, if people are choosing to be utilizing those principles, accountability still has to occur because there's laws and there's, things like that. But it's the way we're interacting with the person, and being able to offer them, voice and choice in our interactions with them. In the context of our relationship or interaction, safety, trust, empowerment, while we're also doing our job and what we need to do to make sure that accountability is there. It also helps to, in the context of an organization, accountability also helps us to place more value on the person rather than really looking and judging the behavior of the person. When we're trauma informed, we're always asking, what's happened rather than like, what's wrong with you, right? And so when we're asking that question, like what's happened, what is the impact, it helps us to kind of get to the next step in a more trauma-informed manner versus being that reactive leader.
Yeah. Tracey, what are your thoughts on accountability?
That accountability, happens in every aspect of life. That doesn't, and that's very natural. We're not talking about a consequence. We're not talking about discipline. We're not talking about humiliation. So I think that is the difference when leaders say, well, trauma-informed care is all like hugs and kisses or it's all mushy. That's not it. Of course, people are held accountable, but that doesn't mean we're humiliating them.
Right.
That doesn't mean that every time you maybe write a goal wrong in an IEP or there's a behavior in a classroom that you're going to be penalized. Right. And if that is the culture, then that is where you may have people afraid to walk into a building, into a classroom, so on and so forth. So it's helping people understand the skills they need to do better next time. When you know better, you do better. So knowing those skills. So there's a crisis behavior, students are fighting in a classroom or something. When I walk in, it's like, okay, what are we doing? I walk in not heightened, even though there are times I walk into a behavior and I'm scared, I'm nervous. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what was the pretense of everything that's going on. But I do know that I need everybody to feel calm. To get, below the level they are at when I walked in. So it's about really understanding. And then what can we do next time to do better? Do we need to look at triggers? Do we need to look at, was the teacher's voice tone? When I debrief after the fact, you always figure out. You always find, just like when you're doing an FBA or something. When you really do a true observation or analysis of what occurred, you truly find that trigger. And then, again, you teach the skills to the people involved to do better next time.
Yeah, I like that, Tracey. You made me think of Shannon's point earlier. I think Shannon said avoiding like over accommodating without skill building and without restoring, right? So I feel like that's what I'm also hearing as well. So I also think, Tracey, of restorative practice. I've done, some work with it. Sometimes in my grad classes, I'll start the night with, all right, here's our talking piece and we're all going to hold it. We'll pay attention, whatever the question might be. How do you think restorative practice, Tracey, intersects with a trauma response approach?
Well, I think how could it not? When we're dealing with individuals, whether it's youth, adults, anybody, everybody has some level of trauma in their life. It's not about that. It's about how you respond to the trauma. You know, I've said it before a million times. Trauma occurs. It's very natural. There's, you know, natural disasters, all the things. And then, of course, there's man-made trauma, unfortunately. Yes. But, or women-made trauma. But it's how we respond, how we cope with it, how we debrief about it, all of those things. So when it comes to restorative practice, and I know we implement this in my program, is really teaching youth that it's okay to have a feeling. And again, we talked about naming that feeling, recognizing that feeling, but it's not okay to then choose a consequence that hurts another individual, that destroys a property, things like that. So we implement restorative practices in a way that youth have to kind of pay with their points that they earn, you know what I mean, to restore something, whether that's, you know, a very minimal, you need to pay 3 points to fix this door or whatever. It takes ownership that, yes, I can have feelings, but when I do something, like, there is a consequence. No one's going to hurt me. I'm not going to be put in an unsafe place that I can't get out. All of those things that may have been, you know, aren't going to happen, but I do have to take accountability. I have to own that I said this. I physically did this. And then you slowly start to change behavior.
Yeah. Thank you. Shannon, how about you? What are your thoughts on that intersection between restorative practice and trauma response?
Well, Tracey did such a great job, giving such a wonderful overview, but, you know, to kind of expand that a little bit, I mean, she was right on. I mean, restorative practices are slowly being integrated, you know, out of the criminal justice system into our education and other types of social services, because it really helps to divert us from looking at that behavior, right? And instead of like asking like, well, what rule was broken and how do we react to this and what is the consequence, to do exactly what Tracey talked about is look at like who was impacted by this situation. What does the person or the individual or the group need? And how do we repair the harm that occurred? And her example of, you know, the youth who they gained some points. They're not being punished. They're not being expelled from school, but they're learning a really significant lesson in, I did this and this was the consequence. But it's a teaching moment. It's not a punitive moment. And so I really like that. So great job with that, Tracey.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tracey. And thank you, Shannon. So sticking on that, the concept of like earning points, right? How do we ensure, Shannon, that we're being equitable in trauma-informed responses so that everybody has the opportunity to earn those points in a way that makes sense for them, in a way that works for them?
I always, you know, when we did that last podcast, I always talked about that quote that Tracey and I really helped to instill, is that universal precaution, right, of trauma-informed care, because trauma is not experienced equally in systems, in identity, and lived experience really matters. So we have to have that universal precaution and understanding that, you know, there may be a certain type of a trauma or a situation occurring in an organization, but not everybody's going to receive it in the same way. And so, you know, in policy procedures, how we interact with others, we have to avoid that one fits all in our responses and our policies, how we do things. We also have to understand that recognizing bias in how behavior is interpreted is really important. Because it's not, you know, across the board. Everybody doesn't subscribe to trauma-informed care, and so their biases will come out. Tracey and I did a lot of work on integrating some of our great cultural brokers to make sure that our trauma-informed care plans and our work that we were doing, you know, was culturally responsive and had those culturally responsive practices in them. We had a very diverse, rich culturally, you know, populations that we were working with. And so we weren't the experts. So it was really important for us to pull in our cultural brokers who were the experts. And one last thing is, you know, I always love my little quotes, right? So like trauma informed without equity can unintentionally reinforce harm. And the three of us have kind of been bringing up that theme of harm.
Yeah.
And if we don't recognize the value of being trauma-informed and, making sure that, equity in our trauma-informed responses is accurate and occurring, then, unintentionally, like you said, Dr. Bubb, we could harm somebody.
Yeah. Trauma-informed without equity can unintentionally reinforce harm. Tracey, what are your thoughts on that or on equity?
I love that quote. I might have to steal it at some point, but
yeah.
I think looking at that, fair is not always everyone getting the same thing. It's everyone getting what they need. And everyone has seen the visual where there's children trying to look over a fence and everyone has like a different ladder or step. And that visual sticks with me a lot. Yeah. And when I'm working with staff or adults, with students, especially really emotionally complex students. So your behaviorally challenged students, your adjudicated students, they're really tough. They've been through a lot. And each individual needs something different, which is why, we individualize things. We have IEPs. And so the reaction or the intervention that they need is going to look different. I don't want to use the word consequence, but, that what they need is going to look different. So the behavior may occur. They may have had a physical interaction with another youth, and one student may get an in-school separation from their peers, and another may get counseling because that's what they need because of knowing that history, knowing what each individual backpack has and what they're coming to the table with. And that's so important to go to the baseline of building relationships, pairing with students or youth, and having that connection so that you know.
Tracey, I like that about the backpack. They're all coming with something different in the backpack, right? And it makes me think of, what you just said about equity, making sure like whatever we establish for each child is what they need, right? So at the same time, Tracey, I think of compassion in like two ways, right? Compassion and consistency. We need to be able to balance it, be compassionate, but still be consistent. But what you just said also made me think of people might need different levels of compassion, right? How do you balance all of that, Tracey? That's a lot to balance.
Yes, I'm tired. But a lot.
Yeah.
And compassion is funny. Some people say to me, like, I am tough. I am hard. My daughter will say it. But I'm also loving and caring, and I meet people where they're at. At least I try to. I mean, that's my goal every day. I wake up, it's a new day, we're starting fresh. But really truly meeting people where they're at so that they feel the safest to truly be, who they are. Same with students. We're going to meet a student or a youth where they're at because going back to what I just said, we don't know what's in their backpack. We do not know the home that they left that morning and the chaotic environment that was there and all of the things. So really, truly meeting people where they're at, I think helps build that trust and that structure of safety. Yeah.
How about you, Shannon?
Again, Tracey always has these great responses.
Stop.
Well, you're in the throes of what I'm like. You're still working with all the youth and the adults, and I admire that. Just like what you said, Tracey, like people feel safest when leaders are being empathetic and predictable. Those aspects of trauma-informed care of being predictable, intentional, creating environments and relationships that are built on trust, safety, empowerment. That's really what leaders need to do to show that compassion and consistency, either more for this person or less for this person, kind of like individual organizational assessments, right? We don't know what, this person's going to need or that. And again, we have to be psychologically flexible in the moment that if we're coming in and this child, their backpack is completely filled and you can see it on their face, or another child coming in smiling, but they just went through something horrendous at home. We just have to have that universal precaution that we have to be able to be flexible enough to not react, but be compassionate and empathetic, and consistent in our reactions to those that we're engaging with.
I like that. Psychologically flexible. I wrote it down, Shannon. I like that.
Yeah, psychological flexibility.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Tracey, you talked earlier about, it's one thing to go to a training and attend a training, but then not making the change. What is the point? Like, what's the point of it? It makes me think of, why collect data if you're not going to do anything with the data, right? So why is that training, if you wanted to expand on that now, Tracey, why is training alone insufficient without systems change?
I think the training sparks that aha moment a lot, especially a foundational trauma-informed care training, a trauma one-on-one, so to say, or an intro to trauma in healthcare and education, whatever field you're in. It sparks that, I've been in hostile work environments, or, wow, I have some unpacked trauma. And I know that because of sitting in that first training 14 years ago and seeing people leave because of the emotional impact it was having on them. And also being a trainer and starting some trainings, and Shannon and I have co-trained a lot, and starting trainings with safety statements saying, like, if at any point during this training you need to leave, this is a safe place to walk out, whatever. So it does, that training is awesome. It's great to spark, to get that. But again, what is the point if you're walking back into an environment that is not supportive, that is overwhelming, that your own trauma that you now recognize does not offer a safe place to express it or have certain reactions to things? So again, building the culture really from the top down with implementing trauma-informed care has to happen, because that organizational change, whether your organization is 5 employees or 5,000, has to happen at that tier 1 in education, what we call it, that universal. So every adult every adult gets intro to trauma and, trauma in the classroom. And then maybe the counselors and social workers may get, applying trauma-informed principles to counseling, or applying trauma-informed principles to testing, and then you move up to the adults. You have the adults, and I think that's the key when you're looking at juvenile justice systems or educational systems or any system working with youth, is the adults have to have that level of care, knowledge, and implementation. So
yeah. Thank you, Tracey. And Shannon, it makes me think of you in terms of like your role as a professor, because I know with my students, I always say to them, Shannon, you can know this book from cover to cover. You can know all this theory, but you have to get out there and put it into practice and then apply it. And I also push them. I have conversations about policy change and systems change and what are you doing to change and improve our field and, things like that. So what are your thoughts, Shannon? I mean, you can answer from so many different avenues, but why training alone is insufficient. So just teaching our students alone is insufficient without any change to the system.
Well, again, Tracey and I found that through our experience that training is very beneficial. But it does just that. It changes awareness, right? At that beginning level, in the continuum of becoming trauma competent, we found that, and we know that systems shape the behavior, right? Yeah. And so those policies, schedules, incentives, how leadership norms are in organizations or in educational facilities, if they don't align, we know people are going to revert under stress. So they could say they're trauma informed, but if the structure is not built, it's not sustainable. So if we want it to be sustainable, we have to make sure that in all aspects, there's policy alignment. Like I said, from job descriptions to the way we hire people, to how we interact with others, how we contract with individuals. There's a very important aspect of leadership modeling. Leaders have to make sure that it's consistent from all levels of leadership, and that they get reinforced over time. Otherwise, trauma-informed care becomes like a workshop, not a way of operating the organization, right?
Yeah. Speaking of that, Shannon, thinking of crisis responses, right? Because we've been talking a lot about, regulation as an everyday practice, trauma-informed care. What's the difference between a crisis response and an everyday regulation practice?
And that's such a great question. I think it builds off of our first one about, reactive leaders. When we define crisis response, it's about that immediate stabilization and safety for the environment, the people, whoever's involved. But when we're looking more long-term, everyday regulation is about prevention and capacity building. So if we're only focusing on the crisis, we're always in that reaction. We're always reacting. We're not getting anywhere because we're not regulated. We're not here. So we know, and Tracey and I, saw a lot of this in our year-to-year organizational assessments from the different schools and organizations, that we saw that, building the capacity for that daily regulation practices, be it a calming corner in a classroom or having a staff break room or a room for, new mothers to pump, it made a difference. So crisis decreased in intensity and frequency. People were coming to work with compassion, satisfaction, right? People were happy to be there. And our workforce was more stable. And so it behooves organizations to build in opportunities for regulation and safety versus always just dealing with the crises and the issues at hand. And you're never getting anywhere because you're constantly back in the back part of your brain. And so is the organization.
Yeah. What about you, Tracey? What are your thoughts?
Obviously, everything Shannon said, I agree with. And then to look at, that's looking at the adult side. And then looking at the student side, I compare it to if someone has asthma, you're not always going to depend on your albuterol or your pump. You take something every day to control your asthma so that you don't have an asthma attack. Right. So like those everyday interventions and supports are so important so that, again, we're not using our asthma pump every day and that albuterol as a safety measure. And everything. I also compare it to, there's many students with mental health challenges who have what we call a PRN. Well, if you take that medication every day, that now becomes a maintenance drug. That doesn't become a drug for an anxiety attack or an immediate emergency crisis. That becomes your everyday drug to prevent the crisis. And that's what's so important, is that preventative medication, intervention, support. So implementing everything that Shannon said, those, even a staff break room that's clean, that has, a microwave and refrigerator in it, things, everyday needs, if you're working somewhere for 8 hours, is so important so that the adults coming in, again, to the environment feel that, so that the energy and the emotions that they're giving off to the youth are of compassion, regulation, safety, and everything, so that you're not, again, always in that crisis mode.
Yeah. Tracey, how do we repair harm, right? I feel like we talked about this a little bit when we talked about accountability, but how do we repair harm or trust after a reactive response? So in using your albuterol example, say, for example, we're going on a trip and we're almost to get in the van, and one student forgot their asthma pump, right? And so the staff yells started having an attack. The staff yells at them in the moment, you're supposed to have it. Why didn't you have it? Whatever, runs back inside, gets it. Like, that's a very reactive response, right? From the staff's frustration. And that's just an example, but how do we repair harm and rebuild trust after a reactive response?
I'm sorry I spoke to you that way. I was frustrated. I'm going to think better, think about it next time. I mean, owning that, whether it's to a student or to an adult, I don't care how old you are, how much experience you are, how many letters you have past your name. It's never, too late, too old, too whatever, too educated to say I'm sorry. Again, I don't know everything. I always tell staff, when I retire, when I'm done giving my input and telling is when you can stop telling me, how to do better. Like, I always want to grow. I recently, in the past year, transferred to a different job and a different workforce, organization, I mean, and I'm learning every day. Yes, the job itself is the same job I've been at, but the organization is different. So I get to learn again, and that feels great to be learning and growing all the time. So leaders are humans, and I think when you put that suit on, to know that, and kind of that's how you roll.
Yeah. I heard you say just saying I'm sorry and I'll do better. You know, Shannon, anything to add? Any other thoughts?
Well, that word human stands out. I mean, you know, when we're a leader and we're being trauma informed, we have to understand that, you know, there is potential to make mistakes, and there's growth in that. There's teaching moments. And if we're not making mistakes, then those that we're supervising aren't going to grow either. So acknowledgement is the first thing that's just so important. Like Tracey said, making statements like, you know, I reacted quickly and that may have impacted you. The second thing I think is vital is ownership, being able to, you know, take it for what it is, not personalize it or become defensive, right? That's a key thing for leaders. And recommitment, you know, making statements like, here's how I'm going to handle it differently next time. You know, I think, you know, Tracey was spot on with that. Is we have to acknowledge, we have to own it, and we have to, you know, create a space for that teaching moment and growth within ourselves. If we can accept that we made a mistake, then we can learn from it, and things are going to get better for everybody. Another quote I have is, repair builds more trust than never making mistakes. And that's spot on.
That's deep.
It's deep, but it's spot on with what Tracey said. It's in the absence of growth. If there's organizations that don't acknowledge their faults, or individuals, they're never going to grow. The organization is going to suffer because those mistakes are going to keep happening. And so when you are able to acknowledge, own, and recommit, that repair can not just be within the person, but within the organization, because there's mechanisms, and you're allowed to make a mistake, and we can grow from it. And that's so, so important.
Repair builds more trust than never making mistakes. I love that one. Tracey and I are just smiling. We just love all those quotes. Yeah, we're going to be using them. It makes me think of, you know, Shannon, giving signals to people, right? Whether intentionally or unintentionally, or formally or informally, that they are safe in our system. And I think of, you know, that quote, and your response and Tracey's response to the previous question is one way, you know, of allowing people to know that they're safe in our system. We're able to apologize, right? What other signals, Shannon, would you say would tell people that they are safe in their environment, in our systems?
Well, I think when people or staff or others that we're working with are sensing that there's some stress or something, you know, is unsafe, they're watching. They're watching the leaders to see how they react under stress, or what they say under stress. So I think safety is really felt through patterns, not statements. And so it's that reactionary. I know we don't want to use that word. We're being, you know, we're reacting, but, you know, staff and others are watching. So, you know, leaders have to be consistent in their responses from all tiers of leadership. That word of shaming and blaming, we shouldn't be doing any public shaming or unpredictable reactions. You know, I've seen it so often in my 34-year career of sitting in high-level meetings and seeing other high-level individuals rolling their eyes or on a Zoom and, you know, screaming at other people. And that doesn't feel safe for anybody. And so leaders and organizations have to really build in the capacity to make sure that we're defining what is safe, what are appropriate verbal, nonverbal communication skills. It's also important for leaders to allow to listen to individuals without immediate judgment. I mean, I think that goes without saying when you're trauma informed is it's not what's wrong with you, it's what's happened to you. And that builds in that capacity. Leaders have to have clear expectations for sure with follow through, right? We see so many times where leaders say this or that and they don't answer emails. So, they're not going to follow through. They cancel supervision. You don't have access to them. And the most important thing overall is, especially in the context of safety in systems, is leaders have to be able to regulate themselves. So, workforce people are watching. If the leader or, high level admins can't regulate themselves, that's going to kind of dictate how it rolls down to staff and then how it rolls down to those that you're serving. And that's the risk of system induced trauma, which is very unfortunate, can happen.
Yeah. Tracey, I know at least for you, like Monet as an example, feels safe, right? Having you as her colleague, as a partner. She talks about it all the time, right? And, I would have to say, like, she feels it, so she believes it, right? She believes she's safe with you as a colleague, things like that. What would you say or add to what Shannon said that signals to people, that they are safe in your environment, in your system, in your school?
Well, I think going back to what we started with, that culture. So again, agreeing with everything Shannon said, and then enhancing by, with whether you add once a month, birthday breakfast or for, staff, announcing birthdays on the overhead. You don't have to have an open door policy because everyone has a job to do. Like, things are busy, but ensuring that you do have office hours. It doesn't have to be that, me as a leader is always calling you to, quote, the office or something for an evaluation or for a meeting or something. Come in, let's chat. There's a lot of times that staff come and aren't happy with a decision, and we hear them out, like, thank you for sharing. This is why the decision was made. Maybe there's information that an individual doesn't need to know, so that's not shared, but giving them what you can so that they understand. Again, it's an environment where we can agree to disagree. You respect the position that an administrator is in, again, no matter what the workforce, but being able to ask or come to a leader to say, hey, I don't like this decision. I don't agree with it. And as a leader to say to that, individual, okay, thank you for sharing that. This is the why. Yeah. Understanding it. Again, you don't have to agree, but a leader has to make decisions, and not everyone is going to be happy, and being okay with that on both ends.
Yeah. I was in a leadership forum last week, and your statement, agree to disagree, reminded me of the one they gave us was agree to commit. Okay. So you may not necessarily, be in agreement, but just agreeing to commit, like for the cause, right? For the greater good. Yes. Yes. Yeah. How then, Tracey, do you as a leader, or how can leaders measure whether the trauma-informed practices that we're implementing are actually working?
We brought up data earlier, and I think that's one way, obviously, for in an educational system. And Shannon is, works with youth. She has worked with youth, but she's also really important work with organizations. So but working with like students or youth, you can look at discipline data. You can look at IEP goals, social and emotional goals. You can look at family surveys, like a ton of all of that. But I think the other important piece is looking at staff, retainment, like how our staff, I know in buildings or, educational settings that I've worked in or have come into, staff turnover. That's a real quick one, easy one, to look at and be like, okay, what's the why? And of course, there's always multiple. It could be environment, meaning I want to work closer to home or vice versa. But again, drilling down to that why on retention, looking at even dress. Are people coming in? I work with complex students, so you're not going to see business suits, but I also don't want to see holes in clothes and certain things. How are people waking up and rolling out of bed? That's a sign, as opposed to putting on, clean clothes or something. How are students responding? How are families? So looking at all of those cultural responses, I think in conjunction with the data is really going to show you where your areas of growth are and where your celebrations can be. Like, wow, look at where we started versus where we are. And then looking at areas of weakness and saying, okay, here's where we can continue to do better.
Yeah. Yeah. How about you, Shannon? How do you measure whether practices are working?
I think in the past, when we were in those positions where we were, when we first started the rollout of trauma-informed care, we were able to do those organizational assessments year after year. And you would start seeing the buildup from awareness to, becoming competent. But Tracey was spot on. I mean, when you're looking at staff retention, if staff are coming to work, they're using less sick time, we're building in that capacity for compassion satisfaction, right? It's a safe environment. People enjoy it. Helping them to recognize the assets of the organization, like great health benefits, vacations, things like that. Also, if you're in a high level position in an organization or in a school, you're able to also look at the healthcare cost. Are your healthcare costs going down with the insurance? Because there's some level of organizations being able to tease that out. If we just implemented a new employee assistance program. Oh, we're seeing a lot of penetration into wellness and therapy. Well, look, our healthcare costs are now going down and the wellness area is going up. And so that's how I think leaders, if they're aware, can kind of measure some of those indicators or policy procedures that they're doing. Also, in terms of schools, I mean, Tracey, you're working with, some, very high level traumatized children. And so thinking about some of our alternative schools here, I think some of those assessments also indicated, reduction in escalations or conflicts, calls to the police. We also profiled that movie, Paper Tigers, right? That implemented trauma-informed care, and it showed from the beginning to when they were trauma-informed and how trauma was healed through relationships, right? The reactions are gone. We're not focusing on behaviors. We're focusing on relationships, So, I guess another quote I like to say in this area is like, if people feel safer, behaviors and outcomes will reflect that. And Tracey and I knew that early on, is that that's what we would see. If there's buy-in from this organization or this school or this small little nursery school, the buy-in's there. I mean, we know this is a movement and it's individualized. Like, two people from one organization, I can choose to be trauma-informed. I can choose to heal or hurt others, right? These are the choices in trauma-informed care. And, for those organizations and individuals that choose to heal people, the outcomes will be there because you'll feel the energy when you're there. You'll see it in the relationships. Yeah.
And the outcomes aren't just immediate. Like, we're talking about generational outcomes. So you change one person, and I know this sounds like, I don't know, so cliche-ish or anything, but Shannon and I, again, like, we've seen it. We've seen it work over years. But you changed one person, because I know when I started changing, the language I use, it's not just, I don't just turn it on from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. or 7 to 5 and then it goes off. I mean, there are some things that go off, but my language may change a little bit, but, if anyone who knows me, but it doesn't go off. So that generational change, just like that generational trauma that we're trying to hear, that generational change is real. So you change two people in a 5,000 person workforce, those two people are going to affect the 10 people in their family. So now we've changed 20 people, and those 20 people now are going to, change the 40 people in their family, and the list goes on and on. And, Bruce Perry and Nadine Burke Harris have told us, the brain is the most powerful organ and the least studied. However, it is flexible. So that, like those parts of the brain, the frontal lobe, that have been affected, we can change by simply caring and building a relationship. Yeah. It sounds so easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
We know it's
I love
not.
That.
Yeah.
Yeah. Care and relationship. Yeah. Saying all of that, Tracey, what would you say if you had to pick one leadership skill, right? What would you say that skill, or what skill would you choose as the most essential skill? I know that's a hard question, but just one as,
but it's not, like self-awareness. Like, I know.
Okay.
And again, like, it sounds corny. And I use it all the time because, someone before me used it. Like, when you know better, you do better. When I learned, I said this before, I became a better parent, a better friend, a better daughter, a better wife, a better human, a better leader, teacher, mentor, everything. Because I'm able to self-reflect. I stopped. My own mental well-being became better. I was able to regulate. And I recognize where I wasn't able to regulate before. I recognize mistakes I've made. I will make in the future. Like, again, I'm human. But I do. The hair on my arm stands up. I get chills talking about it because I know the impact. I do. And it does make a difference. I use this a lot with generational trauma and family members. You'll notice a lot of African-American families when you're talking about a male child or son and you're giving compliments. And Esther, you and I have talked about this. A lot of African-American families will shun that and be like, oh, he's not that smart, or he's so bad. Like, don't do that. And the reason why I've learned is because way back in slavery days, you didn't want your son to be picked out as being smart or strong or brave, because then the slave owners would take them. So over time, over generations, the way we talk about our black sons and fathers and brothers is talking down because of learning that. So, break that, because when I am talking about, my nephew or cousin, I want to say, like, not, oh, he's not that good. Don't give him a, yes, he is. He is wonderful. And you can't have him. You can't have him here, okay?
But he's still wonderful. Doesn't change
still
that.
Wonderful. So, like, really breaking that. So that self-awareness and knowing that is absolutely, again, leaders are human, self-aware. I messed up. I'm sorry.
Shannon, what would you pick as, the leadership skill that's most essential for trauma responsive systems?
Yeah, Tracey was right. I mean, self-awareness, self-regulation is the utmost one. If a leader's nervous system, isn't regulated, then the whole entire organization or school or whatever, the tone's not going to be set. If leaders can't regulate, there's no strategy will hold under pressure, and it's crushing. We've seen that, when we were doing a lot of the trauma-informed care in multiple types of organizations is, if it's not bought in from the top and it's coming in at mid-management, it's going to fizzle out. And, to say some of these, organizations and schools are still trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive, we don't know, because everyone's human. People move on, organizations change. But, my hope is that organizations that see high level turnover or staff leaving, retiring, that's an opportunity for that organization or that new leader to be able to say, listen, we need to do a little bit of an organizational assessment now. Like, why? And it's in the whys, like, why now? Why is this occurring? But if the leaders can regulate themselves, the organization will be more successful and stable and predictable for the workforce and those that they serve.
Thanks for sharing that, Shannon. So to close us out, to get us started with our closeout, one thing that I've been working a lot lately on, Shannon, is avoiding asking, like, what's wrong with you or how are you, instead of asking what happened. So that's a mindset shift for me, because I just grew up. That's a question we all ask each other, right? But for you, Shannon, what is one mindset shift, that you would suggest that leaders can make today for immediate impact?
Well, it's in those quotes, exactly. From, Dr. Bruce Perry, from his book with Oprah Winfrey, is not focusing on what's wrong or what could have been better. It's what may have happened and what do we need to do to succeed. And so that shift moves us from leaders from that judgment to curiosity, right? Curiosity is going to keep us thinking and being active and moving forward. And that's really where the trauma-informed leadership begins. So shifting the perspective. And Tracey and I offered, so many trainings. And there's this video that I use in my trauma course where I teach at those two universities. It's called, now I forget the name of it. but it's about a video of a man who's backing out of his driveway. Tracey, do you remember this? And a kid skates behind him, and he's like, oh my gosh. He goes to the coffee shop, and at the end of the day, you know, some guy comes up to him and he puts on these trauma lenses, and it's called Get Service. It's on YouTube. You can see it, Get Service.
Okay, Get Service.
And it's a paradigm shift, right? Instead of being so upset that what his assumptions are of these individuals, when he puts his trauma lens on, he sees that this person holding the door for him and 2 kids has gone through a divorce. The person that took his, you know, car spot is, you know, just lost somebody. The server at the coffee shop is, you know, going through drug and alcohol addiction. And so we don't know. So when leaders wear their trauma lens, that's that universal precaution that everybody we engage with or hire has had some level of trauma, and that universal precaution is going to give that empathy, that curiosity, and that predictability in all aspects of the organization, but most importantly in those relationships that heal.
Yeah, I'm going to look that video up. It makes me think of, Shannon, one I use is from Dr. Pat Fryman. There's no such thing as a bad boy. You probably heard of it, right? But he's really focused on compassionate care. So in that video, he gave an example of, you know, you're driving to work and this person is in front of you. The light is green and they're not moving. Everybody's upset. You're trying to get to work. You're honking the horn, whatnot. And the one person who took the time to came out saw that the baby in the back seat was not breathing. Right. So it's often referred to as the baby in the back seat, but like that approach, like, oh my goodness. Now all of a sudden the response changes. It becomes compassionate because you're like, this is why the person isn't moving. So thanks for sharing that. I'm going to look that one up too. Tracey, what about you? What is one mindset shift you would say leaders should make for immediate impact?
I think understanding that communication is a sign of behavior.
Yeah. The
basic of ABA, of a lot what we do with behavior and emotional regulation, that every behavior is a sign of communication for adults too. So when I have staff walk in and they're talking fast or their hands are flailing, you know, I take a deep breath and I ask them, you know, okay, what are we aiming to get out of this? When I'm working with youth and there's a behavior, the first thing I ask is, did you get what you wanted? Like, did this behavior earn you what you needed? And tell me what you need. And let's figure out how to get there. So just truly understanding that from every individual you're working with, I think really opens up a lot.
Yeah. Well, Shannon and Tracey, thank you so much for joining our second, episode in our 3-series episode. I look forward to chatting in our third one. I hope you both have a lovely day.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Behaviorally Speaking, Leadership for Changemakers. Shannon and Tracey, thank you for sharing your wisdom, experience, and humanity in today's conversation. Today, our guest reminded us that regulation is not a soft skill, that accountability can exist without humiliation, and that repair often builds more trust than perfection ever could. If you have a story about leadership and behavior from your community, we'd love to hear it. If this episode resonated, share it with someone who leads people. And check out our companion blog, Behaviorally Speaking, Insights for Changemakers, at esthercbubbabaservices.com/blog. For training and coaching and behavior-based leadership support, visit esthercbubbabaservices.com. Until next time, lead with humanity and purpose, practice with compassion and intention, and create meaningful, lasting change. This is Dr. Bubb. Stay inspired.